Hey, what's up nerds? Today I'm doing something a little different than normal. Instead of bringing you a deck upgrade from a precon, I wanted to showcase the deck I played in our Wilds of Eldraine gameplay. So today we're going to be looking at Eriette of the Charmed Apple. This deck's all about casting enchantments on your things, on your opponent's things, and then at end of turn hopefully draining them for a lot while you're gaining a lot. This was a very fun deck to play. But let's just jump into it. Eriette of the Charmed Apple is 1, a white and a black, for a 2/4 human warlock. She says each creature that's enchanted by an aura you control can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. She also says at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of auras you control. So as you can imagine, we're going to be casting a lot of auras onto our creatures, onto our opponent's creatures, and then we're going to sit back and drain their life while our life gets padded. This deck was so much fun to play. Let's first jump into all the creatures that I added in this deck. Since this is an enchantment deck and specifically an aura enchantment deck, let's first go over some of the things that are going to make your auras and enchantments a little cheaper. I put in Danitha Cappuccia Paragon, 2 and a white for a 2/2 human knight. She has First Strike, Vigilance, Lifelink. She also says auras and equipment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Pretty straightforward. It's a good target for auras, and it also makes your auras cheaper. I also put in Hero of Auroras, 1 and a white for a 2/2 human soldier. Aura spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. They also have Heroic. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Hero of Auroras, put a 1/1 counter onto Hero of Auroras. Again, another great target for your auras, and makes your auras cheaper. Starfield Mystic is a 1 and a white for a 2/2 human cleric. Enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. It also says whenever an enchantment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on Starfield Mystic. He'll grow when your enchantment's at the graveyard, and again, he's just making everything a little cheaper. And the last discounter of the group, Transcendent Envoy, 1 and a white for a 1/2 Griffin. They have flying, and it says aura spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Pretty straightforward there. It's got a little evasion with flying, so it might be a good target for your auras, and then it also just makes all your auras cheaper. I really liked all of those includes for discounting and then just being good targets for auras. This next group just cares about enchantments and auras in one way or another. First up, Archon of Sun's Grace, 2 and 2 white for a 3/4 Archon. They have flying, they have lifelink. Pegasus creatures you control have lifelink. It also has Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white Pegasus creature token with flying. Nice little way to create a bunch of flyers, gain some life. This is a strong card in Enchantments Matters deck. Next up, I threw in Armored Skyhunter, 3 and a white for a 3/3 Cat Knight. They have flying, and it says whenever they attack, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put an aura or equipment card from among them onto the battlefield. If it's an equipment that's put into the battlefield this way, you may attach it to a creature you control. Put the rest of those cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. Every time you swing now, you get to dig for the top 6, find an enchantment, throw on the field. This guy's pretty good. I also threw in Auramancer, 2 and a white for a 2/2 human wizard. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may return target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. So maybe they got rid of a creature that has a good aura on it, or they just killed one of your enchantments. Play this card, get it back to your hand, play it again. Great little recursion. Next creatures just have some really good synergy for the deck. First up is Campbell, Council of Allocation. 1, a white, a black for a 2/3 human advisor. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, that player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This deck loves draining your opponents and loves gaining life. This card seemed like an easy fit. I threw in Lightpaw's Emperor's Voice, 1 and a white for a 2/2 Fox Advisor. Whenever an aura enters the battlefield under your control, if you cast it, you may search your library for an aura card with mana value less than or equal to that aura with a different name than each aura you control. Put that card onto the battlefield attached to Lightpaws, then shuffle. This card is a stud in any kind of aura deck. You cast an aura, you get to go just fetch up another one. So now you're casting something maybe negative on an opponent and then going and searching up a really good one to throw on Lightpaws. If you're playing an Aura Matters deck, this card has got to be in there. I also threw in Luris of the Dream Den. 1, a hybrid white-black and a hybrid white-black for a 3/2 Cat Nightmare. They have Companion, but we're not really caring about that. They have Lifelink, and this says, during each of your turns, you may cast 1 permanent spell with a converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard. This just opens up all the things you cast earlier in the game. You get to cast them again. Luris is great recursion. A lot of our enchantments are very cheap, so very nice card. We've got more creatures that just really care about auras. Core Spirit Dancer is 1 and a white for a 0/2 Core Wizard. Core Spirit Dancer gets +2/+2 for each aura attached to it. Whenever you cast an aura spell, you may draw a card. Fantastic card draw. The thing just gets huge when you cast onto it. This is a very good card. And we got some more card draw with Mesa Enchantress. 1 and a white for a 0/2 human druid. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you may draw a card. Straightforward again. Start digging through your deck whenever you cast an enchantment. Also put in Nomad Mythmaker, 2 and a white for a 2/2 cleric. You can pay white, tap them, put target aura card in a graveyard into play attached to a creature you control. This card is just amazing recursion. So now you have access to literally all the auras in your graveyard. Really, really solid creature. I'm also throwing in Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose, 2 and a black for a 1/3 Vampire Cleric. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. You can also pay 3 and 2 black. Creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. This card's great when you have your commander out. All the life you're gaining, you can then just hit another person for even more. And if you really need to, you could pay it and turn all your creatures into some life gainers. This is a really, really good card. Umbra the Mystic is 2 and a white for a 2/2 human wizard. Auras attached to permanents you control have totem armor. And what totem armor is, if an enchanted permanent you control would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy an aura attached to it. Totem armors are really cool. And the fact that this creature now turns all of your auras into totem armor, this card could definitely save your team. And then last for the creatures, some big baddies to throw in here. Sarah's Ascendant is a 1 white mana for a 1/1 with lifelink. And as long as you have 30 or more life, Sarah's Ascendant gets +5/+5 and it's flying. So I know I just said some big baddies and then I talked about it 1/1, but if this is in your opening hand, it is a turn 1 6/6 with flying and lifelink. This card is so good. Another big baddie, Shieldred the Apocalypse, 2 and 2 black for a 4/5 Phyrexian Praetor. She's got Death Touch, and whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. Just more ways to gain you life and hurt your opponents, and she's just scary. She's just a scary card. Your opponents will not like to see this card out. And the last creature I threw in, Zenek, Paladin Unbroken, 2 and 2 white for a 2/4 human knight. They have double strike, and it says auras you control have exalted. This card is pretty busted, so all the auras you throw on all your creatures, you can just swing with one of them now, and they all get +1/+1 for each other aura you have on the field. This could be a really strong finisher for you. Alright, those are all the creatures I'm throwing in this deck, but this is an enchantment aura deck, so let's just get into the meat and potatoes. Starting with all that glitters, 1 and 1 white for an aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. Pretty straightforward. I'm gonna make one creature really big. I also put in Black Market Connections, 2 and a black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, choose 1 or more. You can create a treasure token, lose 1 life. You can draw a card, lose 2 life. And or you can create a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with changeling, you lose 3 life. With all the life you'd be gaining, you're probably just gonna pick all 3 every single pre-combat main. This card is really good. Next, I threw in Blind Obedience, 1 and a white for an enchantment. It's got Extort, so whenever you cast a spell, you can pay a white or a black. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. And it also says artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Just another way for you to gain a little life, hurt your opponents a little bit, and then just the fact that all their creatures and artifacts come in tapped is really gonna upset them and slow them down, and they're just gonna be very sad. Darksteel Mutation is 1 and a white for an enchant aura. Enchanted creature is an insect artifact creature with base power and toughness 0/1 and has indestructible. It loses all other abilities and card types and creature types. This just definitely goes on one of your opponent's commanders and they're just sad. There's really not a good way to get rid of it after that point, so just put it on the scariest commander on the field. Ethereal Armor is 1 white for an enchantment aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control as first strike. Similar to all that glitters, it's going to get really big, but now it also has first strike. Really strong card. Ghoulish Impetus is 2 and a black for an enchantment aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has Death Touch, and it is goaded. When enchanted creature dies, return Ghoulish Impetus to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. With your commander on the field, they can't swing at you. With your commander not on the field, they can't swing at you. And then if that creature does die, you kind of get it back. This is just a really good aura. Speaking of not going away, Gift of Immortality is 2 and a white for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature. When enchanted creature dies, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Return Gift of Immortality to the battlefield attached to that creature at the beginning of the next end step. This aura makes it extremely hard to get rid of some of your stuff, so I like this card a lot. I also threw in Glistening Oil, 2 black for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature has Infect. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a -1/-1 counter on enchanted creature. When Glistening Oil is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, return it to its owner's hand. This one you gotta be a little careful with because I'm always wanting to put this on your opponent's creatures, but if you don't have your commander out, they will start swinging it at you. So make sure you can protect your commander, and whatever you put this on now has Infect, so they're gonna have to go after another one of your opponents. This is a menace of an aura. I also threw in Greater Auramancy, 1 and a white enchantment. Other enchantments you control have Shroud. Just a good way to make sure that no one can interact with any of your fun enchantments. I put in Hyena Umbra for 1 white, enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has first strike. It also has totem armor. Totem armor is very strong. This just kind of buffs up a creature and gives it first strike again and protects it when it dies. I really like Umbras. Kaya's ghost form is 1 black mana for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature or planeswalker you control. When enchanted permanent dies or is put into exile, return that card to the battlefield under your control. Just a nice little way to protect anything you want. Whether it gets killed or exiled, it's coming back, baby. Speaking of returning, we got Minions Return. 2 and a black for an enchantment aura. It has flash, enchant creature. When an enchanted creature dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control. If you see a great opportunity for, let's say, something really big on your opponent's side dying, flash this out, attach it to it, it dies. Now you get it. That's pretty good. I'll put in Nurgle's Rot for 1 black mana. Enchantment aura. Enchant creature an opponent controls. When an enchanted creature dies, return Nurgle's Rot to its owner's hand and you create a 1/3 black demon creature token named Plaguebearer of Nurgle. This card's kind of fun because if you have your commander out, it just makes it to where they can't attack you. And then when it inevitably dies, you get a little bit back and you get the card back. So I like this card. This next aura is a little different because you're not going to be enchanting a creature, but rather a player. I threw in Overwhelming Splendor for 6 and 2 white. Enchantment aura curse. Enchant player. Creatures enchanted player controls lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 1/1. Enchanted player can't activate abilities that aren't mana abilities or loyalty abilities. If you can get this curse off, it kind of just shuts one person down. And if you have Greater Oromancy out to give this thing Shroud, that opponent is just basically dead. The mana cost is a little high, but for what it does for you, it's pretty nice. I also put in Parasitic Impetus, 2 and a black for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and is goaded. Whenever enchanted creature attacks, its controller loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This is similar to the other impetus we're throwing in. It's buffing that creature a bit. It's also making it goaded. But now when the opponent attacks with it, they're losing 2 and you're gaining 2. Like, this does everything your deck wants to do. This card is great to throw in. I'm also putting in Pariah, 2 and a white, enchantment aura. Enchant creature. All damage that would be dealt to you is dealt to enchanted creature instead. So you can kind of sit back and be like, no. Leave me alone. Can't touch me. That creature's going to die. I love this card. I also threw in Phyresis, 1 and a black for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature has infect. This is similar to Glistening Oil. Giving something infect, you got to be careful. Make sure you have your commander out and or can keep your commander out, because once the commander's gone, they will probably start attacking you with infect. But if they can attack you, this is great. Prison Term is 1 and 2 white for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature can attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be played. Whenever a creature comes into play under an opponent's control, you may attach Prison Term to that creature. This card can just hop from threat to threat, and I really like the flexibility of this card. Ragged Veins is in the deck for 1 and a black. Enchant creature. You may play Ragged Veins anytime you could play an instant, and whenever enchanted creature is dealt damage, its controller loses that much life. You can flash this out when a creature is about to take a huge amount of damage, and then have the controller take that much damage. This is a pretty nice card. Reprobation is in the deck for 1 and a white. Enchantment aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a coward creature with base power and toughness 0/1. It's kind of like the beetle that we threw in, but it doesn't have indestructible, unfortunately. They can still block with it though, so careful for that one. We got Sigil of the Empty Throne in here. 3 and 2 white for an enchantment. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying. This is just a great way to ensure that you got a board state. Cast this, and then every aura you're casting now creates you with 4/4 white angel. That's just good. This is a good card. I like this card. Spirit Link is just 1 white enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage, you gain that much life. This is way better than giving something lifelink. This is just, you could throw this on a creature that already has lifelink and now you'll gain double. You could throw this on your opponent's stuff and when they deal damage, you gain life. There's just so much you could do with this card. Spirit Mantle's in the deck. 1 and a white for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature has +1/+1 and has protection from creatures. Put this on a creature to protect it. Anything that has an activated ability, or just you can block. Like, there's so much you could do when your creature has protection from creatures. Really good aura. Also threw in Timely Ward, 2 and a white for an enchantment aura. You may cast this spell as though it had flash if it targets a commander. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature has indestructible. This is just a really good way to save your commander. I guess even if it's not your commander, you can still pay 3 and put it on something to save it, but I'm probably just saving this for my commander. Trespasser's Curse is 1 and a black for an enchantment or a curse. You enchant a player. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under enchanted player's control, that player loses 1 life and you gain a life. So pick the person that's going to be creating the most creatures, curse them, they get hurt, you gain life. It's a win-win for you. And the last aura we're throwing in is Vampiric Link for 1 black, enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage, you gain that much life. So almost identical to Spirit Link. You're going to enchant something. If it has life link, you're going to gain double the life. You could be casting this on enemy creatures. When they deal damage, then you gain life. These effects are so good. Now that we got through all the enchantments, let's go through sorceries and instants. Starting with Farewell. 4 and 2 white. Sorcery that says choose 1 or more. Exile all artifacts, exile all creatures, exile all enchantments, exile all graveyards. So you don't have to always choose all. You're probably never going to choose enchantments just because that could hurt you pretty damn bad. But I can see this always hitting creature, artifact, graveyard just to kind of clear the board up. This is just a great way to make sure you don't die. Retether is in the deck, 3 and a white. Return each aura card from your graveyard to play. Only creatures can be enchanted this way. This is just a great pay for, and all the auras that have died this game now just get thrown back onto the field. This could be a huge momentum swing. Toxic Deluge is 2 and a black. As an additional cost to cast this spell, pay X life. All creatures get -X till end of turn. Just another great way to wipe the board, make sure you don't die. You also don't really care too much about losing that life because you're going to be gaining a ton in this deck. Vindicate's in the deck for 1, a white and a black. Destroy target permanent. You get the flexibility of just destroying anything. So whatever is causing you a problem at that moment, just kill it. And then the last sorcery is Winds of Wrath. 3 and 2 white, just sorcery. Destroy all creatures that aren't enchanted. They can't be regenerated. You will have to be careful with this one because sometimes you will be enchanting your opponent's things. So if you do have a lot of enchantments that are on enemy creatures, this might not be the great card to play right away. But let's say you just have a bunch of enchanted creatures on your side of the field. This could be a one-sided board wipe for you. This is a really good card. Diving into some of the instants, the first up is Anguish Unmaking. 1, a white and a black for an instant. Exile target non-land permanent, you lose 3 life. Just a good way to exile a non-land permanent. Like I keep saying, the life loss in this deck isn't that big of a deal because you're going to be gaining a ton. Path to Exile, 1 white, instant. Exile target creature, its controller may search the library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Everyone knows this card. If you're running white, it's one of the best removal spells in the game. Stroke of Midnight is a new one for 2 and a white, instant. Destroy target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a 1/1 white human creature token. This is sort of like Generous Gift, although it can't hit any permanent, it's got to be a non-land. I do think that that stipulation isn't that big of a deal for you. I get sometimes you want to hit a land, but for the most part, I never really hit lands. And only giving them a 1/1 is a little better than giving them a 3/3. I like this card. The last instant we're throwing in is Teferi's Protection. 2 and a white for an instant until your next turn. Your life total can't change, and you have protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out. Exile Teferi's Protection. This is a great way just to not die. I'm sure everyone's seen this card. Play it. It'll protect you. It'll save you. Next, let's just jump through the artifacts that I threw in this deck. We'll start with all the mana rocks. I put in Arcane Signet, I put in Soul Ring, and I put in Talisman of Hierarchy. Arcane Signet's 2 mana. You can tap it, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Soul Ring, tap it to add 2 colorless. And Talisman of Hierarchy, you can tap it to add a colorless, or you can tap it to add a white or a black, and it deals 1 damage to you. Also put in Archaeomancer's Map, 2 and a white for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for up to 2 basic plains cards. Reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. It also says whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, if the player controls more land than you, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. This card's fantastic for just catching up. Lightning Greaves is in the deck. 2 mana for an artifact equipment. Equip the creature as Haste and Shroud. Equip cost of 0. Really good way to give something on your board Shroud to ensure that it can just not be targeted. Just remember that Shroud means you can't target it either, so put this on the right target. Pearl Medallions in the deck. 2 generic for an artifact. White spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. You do have a lot of white spells in this deck, so making them all cost 1 less, really good. I'm putting in the 1 ring for 4 generic. It's a legendary artifact. It has indestructible, and it says when the 1 ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. And it also says at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the 1 ring. You could tap it, put a burden counter on the 1 ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the 1 ring. This card has a lot going for it. It's a newer card. It seems like it's in a lot of decks now. It's just really good card draw. Like I keep saying with all the things that hurt you in this deck, you don't really care if it hurts you because you're just going to gain it all back. This card's really good. And then the last artifact I have in here, it's kind of like an alternate win condition. Since you will be gaining such a crazy amount of life, I threw in Aetherflux Reservoir. 4 generic for an artifact. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain a life for each spell you've cast this turn. You could pay 50 life. Aetherflux Reservoir deals 50 damage to any target. This can straight up just start killing your opponents. You're going to gain life for everything you cast. This card fits perfectly in the deck. And those are all the non-land permanents in the deck. we'll just quickly go through all the lands I threw in the deck. This deck does have 38 lands. I'm running 16 plains and 10 swamps. It's about a 70-30 split on white to black. So that's why I put in a little more plains, a little less swamp. And then I'll just rattle off the non-basics I threw in the deck. Starting with Bright Clan Pathway. It's one of the pathways you could play on either its white side or its black side, and it'll just tap for that color for the rest of the game. I also threw in Cabal Coffers. You could pay 2, tap it, add a black for each swamp you control. So if you do need a bunch of black, Cabal Coffers, it's gotcha. I put in Castle Lochthwain. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a swamp. It taps for a swamp. You can also pay 1 and 2 black, tap it, draw a card, then you lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. If you do need to draw some cards later on in the game, the life loss won't really hurt because you're just going to gain it all back. Caves of Coilus is in the deck. You can tap it for a generic, or you could tap it, add 1 white or black to your mana pool. It'll deal 1 damage to you. Command Towers in the deck. Tap it to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's identity. Exotic Orchards in the deck. Tap it, add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent could produce. Godless Shrine is in the deck. As it enters the battlefield, you could pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. Just a beautiful shock land. Hall of Heliod's Generosity is in the deck. You could tap it to add a colorless, or you could pay 1 and a white, tap it. Put target enchantment card from your graveyard on the top of your library. Solid land for some recursion in an enchantment deck. Isolated Chapels in the deck. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a plain or a swamp, and you could also tap for a white or a black. Marsh Flats is in the deck. You could tap it, pay 1 life, sacrifice Marsh Flats, search your library for a plains or swamp card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. Just a good old fetch. Vault of Champions is in the deck. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. It can tap for a white or a black. You should always have, hopefully, 2 or more opponents. And War Room is in the deck. You could tap it, add a colorless, or you could pay 3, tap it, pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's identity, and draw a card. Just a solid little way to draw cards. And that is the deck. This deck is so much fun to play. Check it out. Maybe you can make some changes to it yourself. Add your own little spice to it. If you do that though, let me know. Leave me a comment. Maybe there's a card that I forgot. Maybe there's a card that you think just fits so well in this deck that I didn't think about. I'd love to hear about it because I'd love to keep growing this deck. In the description, you'll find the link to the Mox Field. If you want to check it out, you could play test it. Let me know what you think. Also in the description, you'll find links to all of our social medias. That'll be TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, all just @GuysThatMagic. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe so you don't miss out on any upcoming content. And I'll see you in the next video, guys. Bye-bye.